One Elder Scrolls race built a mechanical god and vanished the same day. Another became the gods. This is every Elder Scrolls race ranked by lore, from forgotten footnote to literal divine catastrophe. The Lilmothii are a fox-like beast race who lived along Black Marsh's borders, and that's genuinely everything we know. No playable appearance, dedicated questline, or named characters. Just a handful of lore lines confirming they existed before then. The Hottenflew quietly finished them off sometime in the Second Era. An entire species reduced to a footnote in someone else's history book. Scholars debated their culture. The games didn't bother showing up. F tier. The Aldmer are the origin point of every elven bloodline in Tamriel. Altmer, Dunmer, Bosmer, Dwemer, Falmer, Orsimer, Maormer, every single one traces ancestry back to this one progenitor race from the Merithic era. That's not influence. That's a root node that's split into an entire civilizational tree. The specs are genuinely staggering. The Dwemer, arguably the most technologically advanced species in Tamriel's recorded history, were Aldmer descendants. Their very name encodes the belief that magic and science are fundamental truths of the world. The common tongue spoken across Tamriel derives from Aldmeri speech. Their cultural dominance didn't just shape early Tamriel, it wrote the template every subsequent elven race either followed or violently rejected. But here's the thing, a species so genetically and culturally dominant that their bloodline fractured into multiple distinct civilizations, some of which became literal gods. And yet the original Aldmer no longer exist as a distinct race at all. They built the entire elven world. Then they became irrelevant to it. C tier. Valenwood's great apes decided the best survival strategy was to become Altmer cosplayers. Full powdered wigs, refusing to speak beast tongue, obsessively mimicking high elf mannerisms down to the etiquette and the condescension. They idolized Altmer culture so completely they essentially disowned their own species, which, honestly, takes commitment. And the Altmer still considered them beneath notice. You spend centuries perfecting the aesthetic of a people who won't even acknowledge you exist. F tier. The Dwemer built steam-powered centurions, underground cities the size of provinces, and a functional brass god. Their chief engineer Khajiit wielded 3 divine tools, Wraithguard, Keening, and Sunder, specifically designed to tap the heart of Lorkhan itself. They were constructing Numidium, a literal artificial deity, to transcend mortality entirely. And in 1E700, every single one of them vanished simultaneously. Not died and fled, vanished. Mid-sentence, mid-meal, mid-whatever you do when you're trying to become a god. The leading theory is that Khajiit actually succeeded, pulled the entire Dwemer race into divinity, but they weren't spiritually equipped to handle what they found there. Apparently, when you stare into the true nature of existence, existence stares back and files for a restraining order. The thing is, their automatons are still running perfectly fine in the 4th era, centuries later. The machines outlived the machinists, which sounds inspiring until you remember the machinists erased themselves chasing godhood. One survivor exists, Yagrum Bagarn. The last Dwemer alive, found bloated with corpus disease in a Telvanni wizard's basement. That's your legacy. One guy in a dungeon with a chronic illness. S tier, obviously. The Kothringi were the only silver-skinned humans in all of Tamriel. Not metaphorically silver, literally metallic sheen skin. A whole distinct human branch walking around Black Marsh looking like they've been dipped in chrome. And then the Thracian plague hit in 1E2000. The Sload engineered it, it swept the continent, and the Kothringi, already a smaller population, got erased entirely. One disease, one event, gone. An entire human lineage wiped out before a single game begins. Received here. Right, so we just watched an entire human lineage get deleted by a plague. Now meet the race that sent it. The Sload are slug-like necromancers from the coral archipelago of Thras, and they engineered the Thracian plague of 1E2000D brilliantly. Half of Tamriel's total population, gone. Millions of people across an entire continent wiped by one calculated biological attack from creatures that look like sentient gastropods. And apparently the Sload didn't panic, retreat, or apologize. They just quietly existed on Thras, enormous and slow and completely catastrophic, while the rest of Tamriel rebuilt around the crater they left. Grotesque body, apocalyptic geopolitical footprint, zero consequences. The Kothringi lost everything to these guys. The Sload lost nothing. D tier. Bosmer eat their dead. Not metaphorically, literally. The Green Pact, a binding covenant with the forest deity, Y'ffre, forbids every wood elf from harming any vegetation in Valenwood. Their cities, the famous Falinesti, were grown by the trees themselves because the Bosmer physically cannot cut one down. And the dietary gap that leaves? They fill it with meat, specifically battlefield casualties. Fallen enemies must be consumed within 3 days of death. It's a dietary law that also functions as a war crime, depending on your perspective. Master archers, ancient forest bond, devout ecological stewards who will absolutely eat your corpse. C tier. Okay, so the Falmer. Before the Dwemer turned them into blind cave animals, the Snow Elves were a legitimate elven civilization, sophisticated, proud, culturally intact. Then the ancient Nords arrived in Skyrim and basically genocided them into hiding. And here's where it gets genuinely tragic. The Snow Elves fled underground and begged the Dwemer for sanctuary. The Dwemer agreed. Their terms? Eat these toxic fungi that destroy your eyesight and serve us indefinitely. Generational slavery with deliberate biological degradation. Knight Paladin Gelibor, one of the last uncorrupted Snow Elves, is still standing in a Skyrim chapel in 4E21, quietly waiting while his entire civilization collapses around him. Thousands of years. One guy. A chapel. The thing is, every other race on this list lost power or population. The Falmer lost their actual biology. Enslaved, blinded, devolved into the sightless creatures you find hissing in Dwemer ruins. That's not a footnote, that's a war crime with archaeological evidence. D tier. Khajiit are the only race in Tamriel where two siblings born minutes apart can look like completely different species. Same parents, different moons. One's a house cat, one's a bipedal tiger the size of a small shed. The lunar phases of Maser and Secunda at the exact moment of birth determine which of the 17 confirmed morphs a Khajiit becomes. 17, not 2, not 5. 17 distinct physical forms ranging from the quadrupedal Alfiq, small enough to be mistaken for a regular cat, to the Senche Rot, which stands taller than a horse and is used as war cavalry. Somehow, this single race maintains a unified culture, language, and religion across body types that share almost no physical traits. Their entire theology is built around the moons. The lunar lattice, Ja Kaje, is the framework of Khajiiti existence itself. They also produce moon sugar, simultaneously their sacred substance and Tamriel's most trafficked narcotic, obviously. B tier. Orcs are not a natural race. They are a divine accident with a paper trail. Trinimac was one of the most powerful Aedric spirits in Aldmeri theology, warrior god, respected, legitimate. Then Boethia, a Daedric prince, literally devoured him, used his body to spread propaganda, and excreted what was left. That remainder became Malakath. Trinimac's followers, mid-transformation, became the Orsimer, the pariah folk, cursed, exiled, and written out of polite elven society permanently. They've spent every era since building strongholds in the most hostile terrain available, and somehow making it work. Their code of honor, the Code of Malakath, runs tighter than most civilizations twice their size. A whole culture bootstrapped from a god getting digested. C tier. Argonians are the only race in Tamriel whose biology is literally operated by trees. The Hist, an ancient network of sentient trees native to Black Marsh, determines Argonian development from birth. Hist sap shapes their physiology, instincts, and apparently their military strategy. During the Oblivion crisis of 3E433, when Mehrunes Dagon's forces were tearing through every province on the continent, the Hist sent a signal. the Argonians stopped what they were doing, turned around, and drove Daedra back through their own Oblivion gates. Not repelled, invaded into Oblivion through active gates. Every other province was losing. The Argonians received the biological update and became the most effective counteroffensive force of the entire crisis. No kings or generals coordinated them. The trees said go, and they went. And somehow, the race famous for being enslaved by Dunmer for centuries quietly turned out to be the one species Mehrunes Dagon's armies couldn't handle. That's not adaptation. That's a hive mind with military upside. B tier. Nords. The race that turned screaming into a military doctrine. Ancient Nords weaponized the Thuum, the literal voice of creation, long before the Greybeards turned it into a meditation retreat. They used it to crack glaciers, collapse armies, and fight dragons as standard battlefield procedure. Then, Jurgen Windcaller lost 5,000 warriors at Red Mountain in 1E46, spent 39 years processing that defeat, and concluded maybe shouting at gods was a bad career move. So he founded the Way of the Voice, rebranding a weapon of mass destruction as a spiritual discipline. That's not wisdom. That's a man so embarrassed by one loss, he invented a religion about staying quiet. The Thuum shaped Tamriel's history. Nords just eventually decided to stop using it. B tier. Redguards, the race that crossed an ocean after sinking their own continent on purpose. The Yokadons didn't flee a natural disaster. Their own sword saints, the Ansei, got so deep into blade mastery that the resulting civil war basically deleted Yokada from the map around 1E792. So they loaded onto ships, crossed the Eltharic Ocean, and violently annexed Hammerfell from the Needs. Fresh start. And the Ansei themselves are genuinely terrifying. These were warriors who trained so hard they could manifest a pure magical construct, sword, the Shihai, directly from their soul. Not enchanted steel, their souls shaped into a blade. Then there's Frandar Hunding. This guy wrote the Book of Circles, the definitive guide to sword mastery, and personally killed 300,000 enemies in the Ha-Note War. 300,000. The thing is, Redguards show up in Skyrim as a merchant or a companion. Meanwhile, their ancestors were manifesting soul weapons and committing geological disasters. B tier. Bretons are the only race in Tamriel whose entire ethnic origin is basically a crime. The Aldmer who colonized High Rock didn't just conquer the early humans, they exploited them, and the resulting bloodline became an entire civilization. That's the Breton origin story. And here's what that history actually produced: innate magic resistance, a natural affinity for spellcasting, and enough political savvy to build High Rock's fractured city-state system entirely through noble scheming. No empire required. The Bretons are gifted with the ability to absorb spells. The lore agrees, honestly. They're not the most powerful race. They're just the most functional product of someone else's worst behavior, which, apparently, is enough to build a civilization on. C tier. Imperials didn't win Tamriel through raw magic or combat. They won it through paperwork. And that's not a joke. The Cyrodiilic Empire at its peak controlled virtually the entire continent, not because Imperials are the strongest fighters or the best mages, but because they built roads, codified law, standardized currency, and absorbed every culture they conquered until resistance felt pointless. The legions were just the follow-up email. Their gift, literally called the Voice of the Emperor, is a charm ability. Their defining racial power is being persuasive. That's the whole thing. They are educated and well-spoken. Yes, fatally so, apparently. No other race turned bureaucracy into a geopolitical weapon this effectively. B tier. The Khmer were doing just fine. Golden-skinned, culturally sophisticated, devoted followers of the good Daedra. Then the Tribunal happened. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil murdered their own General Nerevar, used Khagranak's tools on the heart of Lorkhan to steal divine power, and apparently thought Azura wouldn't notice. She'd notice. The curse hit every Khmer simultaneously. Ash gray skin, burning red eyes, the whole package. a divine rebrand they did not ask for. And here's the thing, the Dunmer didn't just survive the curse, they built one of Tamriel's most sophisticated civilizations anyway. Morrowind under the Tribunal was a fully functioning theocratic state with house politics, a living god council, and an entire religious institution, the Tribunal Temple, constructed around 3 people who committed murder to become gods. Their lore density alone is staggering. Betrayal, divine punishment, a prophet reincarnated to destroy the very gods his people worship. They basically got backstabbed into becoming interesting. A tier. The Altmer look at every other race on this list and see a rough draft. Up to 1,000 years of natural lifespan, the highest base magicka of any mortal race, architects of the White Gold Tower, one of Tamriel's most structurally impossible monuments, and the common tongue spoken across the continent is literally just simplified, Aldmer. They didn't conquer Tamriel's language, they just stopped correcting everyone's pronunciation, and the Altmer know exactly how impressive they are. The Falmer didn't emerge from nowhere. They emerged from a race that spent millennia quietly cataloging everyone else's inadequacies. Their entire Fourth Era political project is basically a civilizational superiority complex with an army attached. They pioneered magical theory, maintained cultural continuity across centuries that would swallow entire human civilizations, and decided that still wasn't enough, so they tried to unmake the world to reclaim their divine ancestry. Being good at everything and still not satisfied, which puts them on a collision course with the Maormer, who carry a 1,000-year grudge and a king who refuses to die. S tier. The Maormer got exiled from the Somerset Isles during the Mirific era, thousands of years ago, and have spent every century since making the Altmer regret it. Their king, Orgnim, is rumored to be functionally immortal, possibly through a pact with Daedric forces, which means this grudge has the same management it started with. And that's the thing, the Maormer aren't a footnote, they're a sustained geopolitical headache. Multiple naval invasions, centuries of harassment, and a cold war. The Altmer apparently cannot close out despite being, as we just established, incredible at everything. Somehow, the most magically gifted elves on Tamriel cannot finish off one exiled king. The grudge outlived the empire that tried to end it. C tier. The Dwemer vanished in 1E700, but nobody told their robots. Dwemer, automata, spiders, spheres, centurions are still fully operational in the Fourth Era, millennia after every creator disappeared simultaneously. No maintenance crew, no updates, just ancient brass murder machines running indefinitely on soul gems and engineering nobody has ever replicated. They built something so good it outlived the civilization that made it. Maybe that's the real legacy, not the gods they tried to become, but the janitors they left behind. B tier. Okay, so the Dwemer tried to become gods and got erased. The Tribunal actually pulled it off, sort of. Almalexia, Sotha Sil, and Vivek, 3 Dunmer mortals, used Khagranak's tools on the heart of Lorkhan in the First Era and quietly promoted themselves to living divinity. Stolen engineering applied to a dead god's heart. They then spent the next several thousand years running a theocratic civilization, performing miracles, and accepting worship from millions of people who had absolutely no idea their gods had a biological expiration date attached to an external power source. Then the Nerevarine destroyed the heart in Morrowind, and all 3 lost their divine power simultaneously. Almalexia went functionally insane and killed Sotha Sil. Vivek simply disappeared. The entire theological foundation of Morrowind, centuries of doctrine, architecture, cultural identity, collapsed because 3 people tied their godhood to a geological feature someone else could walk up and stab. The thing is, they genuinely were gods. Functional, miracle-performing, empire-sustaining gods. They just had a single point of failure nobody advertised on the brochure. Mortals who hacked divinity, ran it for millennia, and still needed a save file. S tier. The Aedra didn't just create Tamriel's religions, they created Tamriel. Every mortal plane, every mountain range, every grain of sand in Cyrodiil exists because the Aedra agreed to participate in Lorkhan's plan to build Mundus, and the price was everything. Before creation, the Aedra were et Ada, pure spirits, immortal, unlimited. Akatosh, Dibella, Julianos, Zenithar, functionally omnipotent divine beings. Then they poured that omnipotence into the act of creation itself, permanently bleeding off their own divine substance to hold the mortal plane together. They didn't lose their power in a fight, they donated it, on purpose. The 8 divines that every Tamrielic peasant lights candles for are the diminished echoes of beings that were once incomprehensibly greater, gods who voluntarily became smaller gods so that mortals could exist at all. The Aedra can be found in the world, though they are part of it, the monomyth. And here's the thing, unlike the Tribunal, whose godhood needed a geological power source, the Aedra's sacrifice was permanent. No heart to destroy, no expiration date, just an irreversible transaction. They gave everything to build a universe that immediately started worshipping cheaper, more powerful gods who refused to help. S tier, obviously. The Daedric Princes didn't build the world, that was the point. 16 of them, Molag Bal, Sheogorath, Azura, Merunis Dagon, Hermaeus Mora, and 11 others, each controls a personal Oblivion realm that is, by lore definition, a full plane of existence. Not a kingdom, not a continent, a plane, and they kept all of it. Every scrap of divine power. Because when Lorkhan pitched the idea of creating Mundus, they said no, and watched everyone else dismantle themselves to build a universe for mortals who would mostly die of plague. You cannot kill a Daedric Prince. You can destroy their physical manifestation, but their essence reconstitutes in their realm, which they own, control, and reshape at will. Meruns Dagon invaded all of Tamriel through hundreds of Oblivion gates in 3E 433 and was pushed back only by divine intervention. Sheogorath is literally the Daedric Prince of Madness, and may be a shattered piece of a dead god wearing a funny hat. They don't age, they don't diminish, they didn't pay the creation tax. Every other race on this list built something, lost something, was cursed into something, or sacrificed something to matter. The Daedric Princes just existed, and somehow that's the most powerful move in the entire lore. S tier. Subscribe to the channel for more tier lists like this.